Hello and welcome back to our magical garden. In the last episode of this series, we explored what may be one of the deepest reasons people garden, the need to nurture. We talked about how gardeners care for living things, how gardens teach patience and trust, and how the simple act of helping something grow often gives meaning to our lives. But if nurturing is the beginning of the gardening journey, what happens after years or even decades of that care? What does all that time, effort, creativity and attention eventually create? Today I think the answer can be found in the gardens themselves. Recently I had the opportunity to visit several gardens belonging to members of our local garden club. The gardens were all created by people living in the same community, gardening in the same climate and facing many of the same challenges. And yet they couldn't have been more different. As I walked through them, I kept returning to a quote by the writer Sydney Eddison. Gardens are a form of autobiography. And the more gardens I visit, the more true that statement seems, because a garden is never simply a collection of plants. It's a record of choices, a record of dreams, a record of what someone has decided is worth caring for. And perhaps that is why visiting another person's garden feels so special. We're not just looking at flowers, we're reading a story. The first garden feels immediately familiar. A white picket fence frames the property, shade-loving plants fill the borders, and blackberry bushes promise future harvests. It's the kind of garden many of us imagine when we hear the phrase American garden. It's comfortable, welcoming, practical, beautiful without trying too hard. What strikes me here is the feeling of home. Not every garden is trying to make a grand statement. Some gardens simply create a place where family, tradition and everyday life can unfold. And there's something deeply satisfying about that. The second garden has a completely different personality. The house itself is more than a century old and the garden seems to embrace it rather than surround it. Plants drift into one another naturally. Nothing feels rigid. Nothing feels forced. The garden seems to have evolved over time, growing and changing alongside the home itself. There's a wonderful sense of abundance here, the kind of abundance that only develops after years of observation, experimentation and patience. This is not a garden that was installed, it's a garden that has grown into itself. The third garden reveals a very different vision. The borders are carefully maintained, the lawn is immaculate, the seating areas are thoughtfully positioned, everything feels intentional. Every line has purpose, every plant appears exactly where it belongs. Some people find peace in abundance, others find peace in order. And that's one of the fascinating things about gardens. The sanctuary each gardener creates often reflects what they most value. For some it's structure, for others it's spontaneity. Neither is right or wrong, they're simply different expressions of the same desire to create a place that feels right. If the previous garden celebrates order, this one celebrates tranquility. Hidden behind walls, this courtyard garden feels almost separate from the outside world. At its centre, a fountain quietly draws everything together. The sound of moving water softens the space. The walls create enclosure. The plantings invite you to slow down. Of all the gardens we visited, this may be the one that most clearly feels like a sanctuary. Not an escape from life, but a place to pause and reconnect with it. A place designed not for activity, but for reflection. The next garden tells its story in a different way. There are open lawns, generous spaces and borders filled with ornaments collected over many years. As gardeners, we often talk about plants, but gardens are also repositories of memory. a statue from a special trip, a gift from a friend, a piece of garden art that marks a particular chapter of life. What makes a garden meaningful is not always what grows there. Sometimes it's what the gardener remembers there. This garden reminds us that landscapes become deeply personal over time. The garden becomes part museum, part memory book, and part living landscape. The final private garden feels wonderfully honest. The structure is strong, the perennial borders are substantial, the framework is clearly there, and like many real gardens, it shows signs of being a work in progress. And I think that's important, because no garden is ever fully finished. Gardening magazines often present perfection. Real gardens tell a different story. They evolve, they change, they occasionally get away from us, and then we begin again. In many ways, an unfinished garden may be the most authentic garden of all, because it reminds us that gardening is not a destination, it's a relationship. As our tour comes to an end, I want to finish in a place that represents something a little different. Unlike the gardens we've just visited, this garden doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to the entire community. Our garden club has cared for this space for many years and recently installed this butterfly sculpture to celebrate the club's 100th anniversary. It serves as a reminder that while every garden reflects the person who created it, gardening also has a way of bringing people together. We share plants, ideas, knowledge, and our time. In the process, we don't just create beautiful gardens, we help create stronger communities. Perhaps that's another reason why we garden. We begin by shaping a small corner of the world for ourselves, but over time our gardens often become gifts that others can enjoy as well.